Tetris is one of the most successful video games ever created, but I imagine I don't need to tell you that. Billions of people have played Tetris or a variant of it at least once in their life, regardless of how much of a gamer they are. It's a very simple concept to learn, but is quite difficult to master, which just so happens to be why I love it so much. Tetris as a concept is very easy to modify due to its simplicity, which has led to countless different variations on hundreds of platforms. Today I'll be taking a look at just a few of the ports and variants that have been released. Let's get started. To truly understand Tetris as a concept, it's best to go back and look at the original game. Tetris by Alexei Pajitnov is a tile-matching game for the Electronica 16 microcomputer. It's a very simple game, especially compared to some of the future releases. The sound consists exclusively of shrill beeps, and blocks take a really long time to fall. It's entirely in green with very simple graphics. But even with all of these primitive drawbacks, it's still recognizably Tetris. The mechanics are in place and it plays well. You can tell there's a good reason this game became a worldwide sensation, even managing to transcend the Iron Curtain during peak Cold War tension. And part of the reason why this game became so massive is thanks to Nintendo, who got the license to home console versions of Tetris. The Game Boy was a huge deal. Before its introduction, portable video games were cheap, calculator-like joyrides that got old in about 15 minutes. No one had successfully tried to launch a portable game system with games on par with home consoles. But Gunpei Yokoi had a vision, and it consisted of 4 shades of green. The Game Boy was meant to be a premium system at a relatively cheap price, both to produce and to purchase. And part of the reason the Game Boy truly took off was thanks to the bundled game. Tetris was adapted by Bulletproof Software for the Game Boy in 1989, 5 years after the original game was created. This game is where the classic Tetris theme originates, as well as the general style you'd expect from modern Tetris games these days. It refined the gameplay and speed to a T, nailed the sound, and I mean, come on, it's Game Boy Tetris. You already know it's iconic. Released around the same time as Tetris on the Game Boy, the NES version of Tetris is a similar game with a few notable differences. It's a bit harder, has much different graphics, and notably lacks the Game Boy's iconic Tetris theme. However, it plays really well and doesn't feel much worse in terms of control. The most notable thing about Tetris on NES these days is its prevalence in tournaments. To this day, people are still finding ways to max out their scores in this game, and tournament play is downright insane to watch. And while the US was enjoying this really great port, on the other side of the globe, Japan was getting a different game entirely. Tetris on the Famicom is frankly a mess. It's still developed by Bulletproof Software, and on first impression, you think it's okay, and then you play it. Tetris on the Famicom is graphically perfectly fine and has pretty okay sound, but the gameplay is outright uncontrollable. Down on the D-pad rotates your piece, and A hard drops it. That is all of the piece control you get outside of horizontal movement. Good luck! It's outright impossible to get anywhere with this control method, especially if you have muscle memory like mine. I just cannot wrap my head around these controls, nor understand why this was the control method chosen for this version of Tetris. It's a mess, plain and simple. Avoid at all costs. It's time to jump from Nintendo's variants to, oddly, the arcade. Tetris has loads of arcade outings from many different companies, one of them being Sega. Sega's arcade version of Tetris is actually pretty solid. It's got decent sound, alright controls, although I'm not a huge fan of the way it handles piece spinning, and it's even got trippy background graphics. Thanks, Sega! Next is Atari's take on Tetris in the arcades. I honestly think I might have the least to say on this version. It's so by the numbers that I really have to try to care about it. It controls fine, although the momentum pieces seem to gain when you soft drop them is weird. Sounds okay, and is visually fine, but it's so cookie cutters and basic. It's not worth playing. But if you're looking for the opposite of basic, why not try Tetris Dakaris? A Sega arcade romp, the most notable part of Dakaris is its controller. A giant joystick, who could have thunk it? This game has odd gameplay, but it's still quite fun. This is coming from someone who's playing it on a regular controller as opposed to a giant fuck-off stick, though. It's got 2 modes of note, those being a line challenge mode, which gives you a time limit and requires you to clear a set number of lines. And then there's challenge mode, which has you trying to be the best by clearing as many lines as possible. It's a really strange game, but I really enjoyed what I played of it. Maybe someday I'll get to try the original cabinet. Continuing on the weird-ass arcade tangent, Final Tetris is a Korean bootleg which I still cannot understand for the life of me. It's got such classic characters like Jindog and Marco, and strange power-up mechanics I just don't get at all. It even seems to steal sound effects from Capcom fighting games like Final Fight and Street Fighter. The game's super difficult, controls like ass, and is just a fever dream of a bad game. I highly recommend it. Let's finish this arcade tangent with a game I'd be dead if I didn't at least mention. Tetris the Grandmaster is a series of arcade games that pride themselves on being the ultimate challenge only fit for a Tetris, well, Grandmaster. I've got Grandmaster 3 footage here, and I can guarantee you I am not good enough to be playing this game. It's one of the hardest Tetris games ever made, with some pretty weird controls and stupid difficult speeds. At the risk of sounding repetitive, there is a reason why Grandmaster is considered the ultimate test of Tetris skill. I should really keep practicing the games before I try it again. With Tetris being as massive as it is, mobile games were definitely a given. And while tons existed before this, I think EA fully destroyed the competition with their Tetris game, which had a mix of great music, awesome visuals, and outright perfect controls. This version, released around 2011, was the bomb. It's still by far the version of Tetris I've spent the most time playing, and frankly is a classic. But this smooth sailing wouldn't last, as in 2020, EA unceremoniously shut the game down, promising a replacement game soon. And well, for better or for worse, we got that. Tetris' current mobile outing, developed by Network with a 3, is frankly atrocious. When it launched, it was basically just Tetris. I played it day one and paid the $4.99 to remove advertisements. You had a marathon mode and a few skins. But I went back to the game a while ago with a few friends, and it's become a complete microtransaction-filled fuckfest of terrible. The game locks the marathon mode behind a leveling system, which is outright offensive for a Tetris game. It's got so much bloat it might as well be a Candy Crush game, and the controls are absolutely awful. EA's Tetris had incredible touch controls that felt perfectly balanced and were very natural. Network's replacement is just no substitute. The swipe controls feel messy and imprecise, which is a bad sign. Thankfully, they offer button controls, and honestly, I think they might be worse. They're tiny and have zero feedback, visual or haptic, which means you have no idea what you're doing. I honestly think I did worse using the buttons. The worst part of this entire saga is that if you paid the $4.99 to remove ads at the start, your purchase has been completely invalidated. They now offer a $4.99 per month subscription plan to do what the one purchase would have done before. I'm frankly offended by the absolute mess which is Network's Tetris, and just wish EA renewed their mobile license. When your game has more microtransactions than a fucking EA game, you've ballsed it. Tetris is a massive deal, and is still something many think of first when video games are on the mind. The hundreds of versions are nearly impossible to truly compile into one video, so I hope you got the gist of how many versions and variants there are across loads of platforms. I know, I literally just said this in the last video, but yes, Galaxy Imports is still coming. I'm in the middle of a script rewrite for that video as I really hated the initial draft came out, so thanks for your extended patience.